There are moments in life when your heart breaks quietly, and nobody around you even notices. You're sitting right there, at the same table, holding the same menu, sipping the same wine, and the people across from you, the people you trusted with everything, they're laughing, they're smiling. They think you don't understand a single word coming out of their mouths. I sat at that dinner table, and I smiled back at them. I laughed when they laughed. I nodded when they nodded, and the whole time, I understood every single word, every single one. They thought I was the fool at the table that night. They had built their whole plan around one assumption, one simple, devastating assumption, that I didn't speak German. They were wrong. And before that dinner was over, I was going to make sure they knew it. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're someone who believes the truth always finds a way to the surface, subscribe, hit that like button, because this community is built on stories that are painfully real, and drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this story travels. Also tell me honestly, what would you have done? If you were sitting in my chair that night, would you have exploded? Would you have walked out? Or would you have done what I did and waited? Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And please, stay until the end, because even I didn't fully expect how this would land. My name is Daniel. At the time of this story, I was 38 years old. I lived in Columbus, Ohio. Quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy. The kind of street where people wave at each other in the morning and mind their business by evening. I worked in logistics, supply chain coordination for a mid-sized distribution company. Not glamorous, but stable. Good salary, good benefits. The kind of job that doesn't make you rich, but it doesn't keep you up at night either. Or it didn't used to. I'd been married to my wife, Claire, for 6 years. We met 11 years ago at a mutual friend's cookout. She was standing near the drink table, laughing at something on her phone, and she had this laugh. It wasn't delicate. It wasn't practiced. It was loud and real and slightly embarrassing, and I loved it immediately. We dated for almost 5 years before we got married. 5 years. I thought that was enough time to know someone. Claire was smart, incredibly smart. She had a master's degree in international business, spoke conversational French, had lived abroad for 2 years in her mid-20s. She had this energy about her that made rooms feel alive. She was also driven, ambitious in a way that I always admired. She'd climbed fast in her career, worked for a global consulting firm that had offices all over Europe. Her clients were mostly European. Her team was international. I supported that completely. I was proud of her, actually. We didn't have children yet. We talked about it. The timing never felt perfect to us both at the same time, but we were working toward it. At least, I thought we were. We had a good life. Date nights every couple of weeks, lazy Sunday mornings, holidays with her family in Michigan, weekends away when we could manage it. I trusted her, not because I was naive, because I had no reason not to. That's what makes this hard to explain to people. It wasn't blind trust, it wasn't ignorance. It was the trust you build over years, over thousands of small moments, over arguments resolved and apologies made and promises kept. I trusted Claire because she had earned it, and I thought I had earned hers. Now, her boss. His name was Marcus Bauer. He was German, transferred to the Columbus office about 14 months before that dinner. He was in his mid-40s. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who makes you feel slightly underdressed just by standing next to him without trying. Claire had mentioned him in passing a few times when he first arrived. My new director is starting Monday. He's coming from Frankfurt. Should be interesting. That's all it was at first, a professional introduction, background noise. Over the next few months, she mentioned him more, not dramatically, not in ways that triggered anything, just, Marcus wanted the Hendricks account restructured. Marcus prefers in-person presentations, which is exhausting. Marcus actually agreed with my proposal today, which shocked me. He was just her boss. That's all he was to me. I had no reason to look closer. I didn't. The changes were so small at first that I almost missed them completely. Almost. It started, I want to say 8 or 9 months before the dinner. Maybe a little longer. It's hard to pin down exactly because when you're inside something, you don't always see its shape. She started staying later. Not every night, not even most nights, but enough. Quarterly review season, she said. That made sense. It happened every year. Then it was a client in Brussels that needed evening calls because of the time difference. That made sense too. Then her phone started going face down on the table. It had never done that before. I noticed it once and didn't say anything. I noticed it twice and told myself it was nothing. By the third or fourth time, I started filing it somewhere quietly in the back of my mind. She laughed differently on calls sometimes. Lighter, more careful. There's a laugh people have with coworkers, and there's a laugh people have with someone they're performing for. I'd been with this woman for 11 years. I knew the difference between her real laugh and her careful one, but I also knew I could be wrong. I could be building something out of nothing. I had done that before in a previous relationship years ago. Convinced myself something was happening when it wasn't, and I almost destroyed something good over paranoia. I didn't want to be that person again, so I talked myself down, over and over. She works hard. That's always been true. She's under pressure. That's real. You are projecting. Stop. I wanted to believe the simple explanation, because the simple explanation meant everything was fine, and I needed everything to be fine. She suggested the dinner on a Thursday evening. I remember I was making pasta. Nothing special, just getting through the week. She came home, dropped her bag on the chair near the door the way she always did, and she said, "Hey, what if we did something nice this weekend? Like actually nice. Dress up, go somewhere we haven't been." I turned around and I smiled, because honestly, it felt good to hear. Things had felt slightly off balance between us for a while. Not broken, not dramatic, just slightly tilted. Like a picture frame that's almost straight, but not quite. And this felt like her reaching towards something, toward me. "Yeah," I said, "let's do it." She picked the restaurant, a place downtown called Ilara. We'd driven past it 100 times but never gone inside. It was one of those places with dim, warm lighting in the windows and candles on every table, and a menu you had to look up online because the printed version was in a font too small for normal human eyes. Saturday night. She wore a dark green dress I hadn't seen in a while. She looked beautiful. I told her that in the car and she smiled, and for a minute, just a minute, everything felt the way it used to. The restaurant was exactly as I'd imagined. Low ceilings, amber lighting, soft jazz from somewhere you couldn't quite identify. The tables were close together but still felt private somehow. They had that particular kind of atmosphere that makes you lower your voice and slow down. We were seated near the window. She ordered a glass of red wine immediately. I got sparkling water to start. We talked. Easy conversation, weekend plans, a show we'd been watching. Something funny that happened to her sister. I felt myself relaxing. I remember thinking, this is good. This is what we needed. And then her phone lit up on the table. She glanced at it. Her expression shifted. Just slightly. So quickly that most people would miss it. I didn't miss it. She typed something back and placed the phone down and looked up at me with that careful smile. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, sorry," she said. "Just Marcus, work thing. It's fine." I nodded. I picked up my menu, and maybe 20 minutes later, he walked in. Marcus Bauer. He was dressed in a dark navy jacket, open collar, no tie. The kind of effortless put together that some men have, and most men spend money trying to find. He spotted our table immediately. He smiled at Claire first, then at me. "Daniel," he said, extending his hand like we were old friends. "I hope you don't mind. Claire mentioned you'd be here tonight, and I was in the area. I hope it's not an intrusion." I looked at Claire. She was smiling. Calm. Too calm. "Of course not," I said. "Because what else do you say?" The chair was already being pulled out. He sat down. And just like that, our date night became something else entirely. I want to be honest about this moment. I want to be fair. At first, I gave it the benefit of the doubt. Bosses run into employees. Plans shift. Maybe it really was spontaneous. Maybe. But something in my chest had quietly changed the moment he walked through that door. Not anger, not yet. Just awareness. A very still, very quiet awareness. The conversation was pleasant on the surface. Marcus was polished, there's no other word for it. He had the kind of social fluency that comes from decades of international boardrooms. He asked me questions about my work, my background, my interests. He listened when I answered. He made eye contact. He was doing everything right. That should have put me at ease. It didn't, because underneath all of it, there was something I couldn't quite name, a current running beneath the conversation. The way Claire laughed a little too quickly at his observations. The way she touched her hair twice when she was looking at him. The way they had that particular ease with each other that you don't develop from quarterly reviews and Brussels calls. I noticed all of it. I kept eating. I kept nodding. I asked him about Germany, about his time in Frankfurt. Normal questions. And then he said something to Claire in German. Just a casual aside. He gestured at the menu and said something about the wine list. Claire laughed softly and answered him back in German. They'd done this before clearly, slipped between languages mid-conversation, a bilingual shorthand, and I smiled. Because that's what you do. What they didn't know was that I understood exactly what he'd said. Let me explain something about my background. My father's side of the family is German-American. My grandfather came from Stuttgart in the 1960s. He lived with us for several years when I was growing up. Stubborn man. Absolutely refused to speak English at home. My father grew up bilingual. I grew up hearing German every holiday, every Sunday dinner, every phone call to relatives overseas. I never formally studied it, but I absorbed it the way children absorb language. Deeply, naturally. By the time I was a teenager, I could follow a full conversation without effort. By the time I was an adult, I was fluent. I just never advertised it. There was no reason to, mostly. Claire knew I had German heritage. She did not know I spoke it. And in that moment, at that table, in that restaurant, with the amber lighting and the soft jazz, I was very, very glad she didn't. The German asides continued through the meal. Small things at first, comments about the food, something about a colleague back in Frankfurt, nothing significant. I responded to the English parts of the conversation as if that were all there was. I smiled at the right moments. I filled my water glass. I existed as the man who didn't understand. And they let me. The shift happened over dessert. Marcus had ordered something with dark chocolate. Claire had the creme brulee. I had coffee. They were talking in English about a project timeline when Marcus glanced at me briefly, then looked back at Claire and lowered his voice just slightly and switched to German. He said, "Does he know anything?" Claire's expression didn't change. She stirred her creme brulee and said in German, calmly, "He doesn't suspect. He trusts me completely." Marcus smiled, not a warm smile, a satisfied one. He said something I won't repeat exactly, about their arrangement, about how long it had been, about how certain things had become complicated. And then he said it. He looked at Claire and he said, in German, quietly, "And if things go the way you're planning, he'll take care of your kids thinking they're his." And Claire, she didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She just looked at him with those eyes I had looked into 10,000 times. And she said, "That's the plan." Time does something strange in moments like that. It doesn't stop exactly. It slows, like everything is moving through water. I heard those words, I processed those words, and then I felt something happen in the center of my chest that I have never fully been able to describe. It wasn't a sharp pain, it was a collapsing feeling, like something that had been standing for a very long time simply sat down. My hands were in my lap. I didn't move them. My face, I kept it exactly where it was. Slight smile, easy eyes, present but unbothered. The performance of a man who has heard nothing, because they were still watching me. They were still having a conversation with me in English. Marcus made a joke about something. Claire laughed, and I laughed too. I don't even know what the joke was. I just laughed, And inside I was somewhere completely different. I was back at our wedding 6 years ago, in a small venue outside the city, watching her walk toward me. I was back at a Tuesday morning 2 years ago when she brought me coffee in bed for no reason and sat on the edge of the mattress and said, "I just like you a lot, you know?" I was back at every moment I had chosen her, every moment I had chosen to believe in her. And I was sitting at a table in a restaurant called Alara with soft jazz and amber lights while she sat across from me and told another man that their children would carry my name without my knowledge. I smiled. I asked Marcus if he'd been to any other restaurants in Columbus he'd recommend. He told me about a place in the short north. I nodded and said I'd heard good things about it. We ordered the check. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark next to Claire, and I stared at the ceiling, and I let myself feel it. All of it. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't open a laptop. I didn't plan anything yet. I just let it sit in me. Because I had learned something years ago about emotional pain. If you move too fast, you act from the wound. And acting from a wound usually makes things worse. I wanted to be precise. I wanted to be clear. I wanted to be sure about what I knew and sure about what I was going to do with it. So I waited. I lay there next to the woman I had loved for 11 years and I listened to her breathe. And I made myself a promise. Not a dramatic one, not a revenge fantasy, just a quiet, certain promise to myself that when the moment came, I would not fumble it. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I functioned normally on the outside. Work, dinner, conversations about nothing, errands, the ordinary machinery of a life that had quietly broken. But inside, I was putting things together. I started noticing how often she mentioned Marcus, how often she didn't. I noticed the pattern of the late nights. I started paying attention to dates, to details, to the shape of a story I hadn't been told, and pieces came back to me. Memories that had seemed harmless before suddenly had new meaning. A weekend work retreat 7 months ago that she came back from quieter than usual. A text she'd angled away from me at breakfast one morning in February. A comment she'd made about the future once, vague and strange, that I'd brushed aside. "I just want to make sure we're building something real, Daniel. Something that lasts." I'd thought that was sweet. I'd thought she meant us. Now I heard it differently. I thought about the children conversation. We had talked about starting a family within the next year or so. She had seemed enthusiastic, hopeful, and now I understood what that enthusiasm had really been about. The thought made me feel physically ill. I went for a long drive one evening and parked by the river and sat there in the dark for almost an hour. I wasn't crying. I was past crying. I was in that place that comes after, the cold, clear place, where you see things very exactly. I didn't confront her privately. I know some people will disagree with that choice. Some people would say you confront your spouse first. You give them the chance to explain. You fight for the marriage. But here's the thing. There was nothing to fight for. She hadn't made a mistake in a moment of weakness. She had made a plan, a deliberate, calculated plan, with another man, at the same dinner table where she'd invited me. The audacity of that wasn't an accident. It was confidence. The confidence of someone who believes they are completely in control, who believes they have every angle covered, who believes the person sitting across from them is too simple, too trusting, too unaware to see what's happening. I thought about that confidence, and I decided that confidence was going to be the thing that undid her. I called Marcus's office the following Monday, calmly in English. I asked his assistant if he was available for a dinner meeting that Thursday. I mentioned that Claire had spoken highly of his leadership and that I had a potential business interest I wanted to discuss. I had no business interest, but it was enough. His assistant called back that afternoon, Thursday at 7, same restaurant. I almost laughed. I told Claire we were going to dinner Thursday, just the two of us, I said. She smiled and said that sounded wonderful. I watched her face carefully. No hesitation, no flicker. Perfect. She was very good. I had always known she was intelligent. I just hadn't understood exactly how she'd been using it. Thursday came. We arrived at Alara again. Same amber lighting, same soft jazz, same quiet intimacy. We were seated, and 5 minutes later, Marcus walked in. He stopped when he saw us both. A microsecond of something crossed his face. Then the smooth recovery. "What a coincidence," he said. I stood and shook his hand. "Not exactly," I said in English. "I asked you here, Marcus. Please, sit down." He looked at Claire. She looked at me. Neither of them said anything. They sat. I let the silence stretch. I poured water from the carafe on the table. I set my glass down slowly, and then I looked at both of them. And I said, in German, fluent, clear, unhurried German, "I want you both to know that I understood everything you said to each other the last time we were in this restaurant." The air left the table. I watched Claire's face. I want to describe this carefully because I've replayed it many times. It wasn't immediate panic. It was a progression. First came confusion, a split second where her brain was trying to reconcile what she just heard with what she believed she knew. Then recognition. Then something I can only describe as a falling. Her expression fell. Marcus had gone very still. His jaw was set. His eyes had shifted into something calculating, trying to assess. I continued in German. "I know what the plan was. I know what the conversation was. I know the exact words that were spoken about my future and about children I was never supposed to know weren't mine." I paused. Then I switched to English. Slowly. "I just thought you should both know that the foundation of your plan was wrong from the beginning." Claire opened her mouth. No sound came. Marcus looked at the table, and I stood up, calmly. I placed my napkin on the table the way you do at the end of a meal. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, and I said, "One more thing," in German. My grandfather always said that the most dangerous people in the room are the ones who say nothing. I looked at Claire one last time. "I've already spoken to an attorney." And then I walked out. The weeks that followed were not a movie. That's something I want to be honest about. They were hard, unexpectedly, exhaustingly hard. Even when you know the truth. Even when you've made the decision. Even when you walked out of that restaurant with your dignity intact. The grief still finds you. At 2 a.m, in the middle of making coffee, driving to work on a Thursday, because you're not just grieving a marriage, you're grieving 11 years of your own belief in something. You're grieving the version of a person you thought you knew. Claire called. Multiple times. She sent messages. She showed up at my office once, which was the moment I knew the attorney conversation hadn't been a bluff to her anymore. She cried. She said she was sorry. She said it had been a mistake. She said it wasn't what I thought it was. I listened. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I didn't give her the dramatic reaction she might have expected. I just said quietly, "I heard what you said, Claire, in your own words, in a language you didn't think I understood." There's not much to say after that. Marcus was transferred back to the Frankfurt office within 3 months. I'm not certain of all the details around that, but I know that his presence in Columbus became professionally complicated. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. No children to negotiate. A clean, painful, legal severance of something that had taken years to build. Her family was devastated. My family was angry in the way families get when they feel like someone hurt someone they love. Some of our mutual friends took sides. Some of them disappeared entirely, the way people do when a marriage ends and they don't know how to stay connected to both halves. I let all of it happen. I didn't perform my pain publicly. I didn't tell the story everywhere. I just moved through it. I've thought a lot about the question people always ask when they hear the story. Did she deserve what happened? And I want to be honest with you, that's not a question I spend much time on anymore. She made choices. Those choices had consequences. That's true for all of us. What I think about more is the question of who I was in that restaurant. Not when I stood up and walked out. Before that, when I sat there for the full dinner, when I laughed at jokes I barely heard, when I looked at the woman I loved and felt my entire understanding of my life rewritten in real time. And I stayed calm. I stayed present. I stayed patient. That's the version of myself I'm most at peace with, not the one who exposed them, the one who didn't fall apart. I live differently now, same city, different apartment, smaller, quieter, and I've come to love that about it. I got a dog, an older rescue named Hank who sleeps on the couch and has no opinions about international business. I took a German class, not because I needed to, just because it felt like reclaiming something. My grandfather would have found the whole story equal parts tragic and hilarious. He had that kind of humor, the kind that comes from people who've seen real hardship and learned not to take smaller heartbreaks too seriously. I think about him sometimes, and I think, he taught me that language without knowing he was arming me. If this story touched something in you today, leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop your thoughts in the comments because I genuinely read them. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me if you think I handled it right. Tell me if you think I went too far. Tell me where in the world you're watching from, because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply know their worth and refuse to pretend otherwise.